Hi, it's Jill here. Thanks for clicking in and opening up the video. This is a quick video to go over assessment task 1. I'm going to explain the key assessment criteria for your persuasive essay and hopefully leave you in a position where you're ready to start your task. Following this video, you'll be able to join in one of our live Collaborate sessions, and if you have any questions or if you're after some ideas about how to start, that's where we can get in and really talk about it and sort out any issues you have. So let's make a start. So let's explore the assessment 1, the persuasive essay. I'll apologise at the start if you hear rustling and clunking in the background. That's my little Harry playing with his toys. Let's find out a bit more about this essay. So the key details are that you have 1,500 words to play with. You need to write a minimum of 1,350 or a maximum of 1,650. And of course, any words on your reference page are excluded from that word count. This assessment is worth 30% of your overall grade, and it's due on Monday morning in week 5. The task requires you to draw on the learning materials. That's our podcasts, readings, and activities. And we're asking you to look at weeks 1 to 3 and have a really good understanding of that first module. You're going to be asked to articulate your understanding of language and literacy development and the way that it applies in a primary school context. And as a result of this assessment, you'll be able to show us your understanding of 2 of the learning objectives from this unit. That is, your understanding of the way that English can be taught, including language acquisition and literacy development, and also your understanding of the pedagogical approaches, the way that it looks when you're applying it in a classroom practice. You're going to be writing a persuasive essay, and we'll talk a bit more about persuasive as we go through. But the essay will be based on the following question. So, what is the most relevant reading model for addressing 21st century literacy demands? Obviously, you'll need to understand what a reading model is, and we'll be discussing that in our weeks 1 to 3 tasks, activities on our assessment, on our discussion boards. You'll need to understand what 21st century literacy demands are, and you'll be able to draw those from the reading materials and from your own research. And you'll also have to illustrate your response with examples of classroom practice. So these classroom practices are where we're asking you to give us examples and illustrations of what those reading models look like in a classroom practice. You'll be looking at chapter 4 of your e-text. That's where they talk about reading models, so you'll be able to understand what the difference is between a model and a theory, and you'll be able to focus on a model for this assessment. You only need to argue for one of these models. You don't need to spend a lot of words exploring all 4 of them. And just be aware that you need to use the readings from our learning materials as well as your own research. In order to meet the pass criteria, you'll need to access both. You'll need to refer to both the learning materials and your own research. You'll also need to write in the 3rd person. Have a chat with your ELA if you have any trouble with any of those ideas, or if you're after examples of how to write in the 3rd person or how to develop a persuasive essay. When you look through the task the assessment task, you'll find that there are 4 criteria. These are knowledge of literacy development, understanding of classroom practices relevant to literacy development, having a clear format and structure to your essay, and including academic research and referencing. So criteria 1 about your knowledge of literacy development. You need to persuade the reader that your theory and model, your model, is the best for addressing 21st century literacy demands. You are being persuasive in this essay, so you need to choose one of these models and argue strongly for it. Think about which of those models, so for example, the 4 resource model or the skills model, which of those would best match 21st century literacy demands, not just one that you align yourself with. So if you are feeling at the moment in week 1 like you're leaning towards the skills model, have a real think about whether that is best matched to 21st century literacy demands. You need to show that you have a deep, critical and mature understanding of the literacy demands of the 21st century. So you'll need to make sure that you've got all of the ideas about that from our learning materials, that you have a strong understanding of the model you have selected. This is the part where you need to understand the difference between a theory and a model. In week 1, we're looking at bottom-up theory. That's the overarching ideals and themes and beliefs. And one way to present that theory is through the skills model. The way that you talk about the model in your persuasive essay will demonstrate if you have an understanding of the difference between a theory and a model. You'll show that you have identified the literacy in the demands of the 21st century. So you'll be able to explain what those demands are, that your argument is sound, logical and persuasive, and it's not just based on your opinions but supported by valid evidence. So that's where your referencing of the learning materials comes into play, along with your own research, and you'll be searching for those peer-reviewed published papers from the Swinburne Library or perhaps from Google Scholar. So the key idea of criteria 1, show us that you understand the model and that you're clear on what 21st century literacy demands are. Criterion 2, your understanding of classroom practices relevant to literacy development. You need to include clear examples of the practice. If you tell us that, still working from week 1, we're looking at the skills model. If the skills model believes that you should start with single letter sounds, tell us a classroom practice, an activity that you're teaching would do with your students, which shows how to teach single letter sounds. Now, if you're not choosing that model, that won't be your example. I've got some pictures here that have got some perhaps shared writing about an experience at a supermarket. That might be an example of a different model that you might choose to argue. Name the practice and link it back to your argument. Make sure you're always clear with your paragraphs. Tell us what you think is important, give us your example, back it up with research, retell us. That's called the TEAL structure, paragraph structure, TEEL, if you want to do some research about that structure. And include relevant and innovative examples. Relevant and innovative are key terms from the HD criterion for this assessment. We want to know that you're searching out current and quality examples for your own teaching practice, so that when you head into a classroom, you'll be giving the best ideas to your students. So, the key idea for criterion 2, link the theory to contemporary classroom practice. Criterion 3 is looking at the format and structure of your essay, including conventions for academic English and your capacity to argue persuasively. Remember that this is the only English unit you'll be undertaking as part of your qualifications. So we need to know that you're fluent and expressive in English, that you can develop a well-written essay. So this is important. This is an important part of your unit and your assessment. So draft and redraft, please. Edit it and re-edit it. Ask someone to proofread it for you. All of these things could be the difference between a pass and a credit, or a distinction and a high distinction. Make sure you understand what a persuasive essay is all about. Spend some time Googling persuasive academic essays. There's loads of information out there. Double check your information via the discussion boards with your ELA and with your group. And do make use of your tutor and Smart Thinking. They are fantastic resources. If you've got time to submit a draft to them, make sure you utilise that resource. So some of the things that are important to your essay are having a clear introduction, a series of well-developed paragraphs, and an excellent conclusion. In your introduction, you'll need a clear thesis statement. Again, find out what that means if you've not come across the term thesis statement before. But basically, it's one sentence that is your answer to that question. What is the most relevant reading model for addressing 21st century literacy demands? Your thesis statement will introduce the points that you will argue in your essay. And it might be something simple, like saying the most relevant reading model for addressing 21st century literacy demands is ... And this essay will explore ... What things will you be exploring? That's a stock standard one, and that will get you a pass. Developing a more engaging and interesting way of saying that is how you move up from a pass towards a high distinction. The intro will be followed by a series of paragraphs, and this is where your planning comes in. Once you start to find out the key ideas of your model, the key messages that you'll be exploring, which paragraph will be looking at your examples of classroom practice, which paragraph will be discussing the reading model, which paragraph will be looking at what are 21st century literacy demands. So you'll start to map those out into a plan for your essay, and then start to develop a series of paragraphs for each of those key ideas. Remember, it needs to be a persuasive argument, so ensure that you are taking a strong stance and arguing for that particular stance. Remember to include those examples of classroom practice and try and build it in a logical and reasoned way towards your conclusion. And just a note on the conclusion, make sure that it sums up your key argument and doesn't just restate the introduction. So spending time planning your essay will definitely benefit your final draft, and it will also lead towards your redrafting and your editing and proofreading. So the final criterion is about academic research and APA referencing. Remember to draw your resources from our weekly learning materials. Remember to find your own scholarly literature, those peer-reviewed articles and published texts, finding those from the Swinburne Library and from Google Scholar, and avoiding less credible sources that you might find through a regular Google search. And make use of the Swinburne Library, of course. Take time to become an APA guru, and that will see you towards those fantastic marks in your assessment. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about the holistic rubric. You'll notice that the rubric for our assessments in this subject, in this unit, is graded as, rather than being broken into smaller criteria, each standard needs to be achieved before moving on to the next standard. So if you don't meet all of the descriptors in the pass criterion, in the pass standard, you won't be able to get that pass for the unit, for the assessment. And that includes things like clear APA referencing and a cohesive, well-written text. I guess you can think about this as an analogy of learning to drive a car. So if I am an expert at changing gears, but I don't know the road rules, I couldn't achieve an excellent pass at an excellent standard for my driving. And similarly, if I have an outstanding ability to drive in a straight line, but I'm incapable of travelling at more than 10 kilometres an hour, I'm not really a very good driver on average. So if in your assessment you found incredible research, but you haven't referenced that correctly, then you can't achieve a distinction or a high distinction standard based on your research. You'll be dropping down to whatever your referencing standard is. Please have a chat to your ELAs if you're not sure about these holistic rubrics. You might have already used them before here at Swinburne Online. And they're definitely not something to be worried about or scared of. They're just something to encourage you to look at the entirety of your assessment and to aim to achieve a high standard in all areas. So let's look at those standards. I'm just going to pull out the pass and high distinction standards, and you'll be able to read your way through the credit and distinction if you need some more information. So to achieve a pass, your introduction needs to identify literacy demands of the 21st century at a rudimentary level. You'll need to do a basic explanation of 21st century literacy demands. So you probably want to do at least one paragraph on that area. Your introduction includes a clear thesis statement and introduces the key points of the argument. That's going to come down to your planning as well, and having a really clear idea of what are the key points, what's each paragraph going to be about, and introducing that at the start of your essay. The reading model you have decided is the most relevant to address, is clearly stated and appropriate for addressing the 21st century literacy demands. So you can see I've highlighted clearly stated and appropriate. Obviously naming it and describing it's going to help ensure that it's clearly stated, and you'll be able to make a decision about whether it's appropriate for 21st century literacy demands. You will need to link those two ideas together. At a pass standard, even though your essay might not be persuasive, you made an attempt at developing an argument. The examples that illustrate the model in the classroom are evident and demonstrate emerging knowledge of English teaching practices. At a minimum pass standard, you need to have examples of what the model looks like in a classroom practice. And at a minimum standard for a pass, you need to demonstrate competence in academic writing, and you need to write in the third person. So these are all the key things that you need to make sure are in your essay, that you talk about 21st century literacy demands, that you identify a model, that you write to the best of your ability and write in the third person, that you include those examples of teaching practice. They'll be the key ideas that you're sharing in the week's 1 to 3 tasks. This week we're exploring what classroom practices might be linked with the skills model. So make sure that you are doing those weekly tasks and you'll be right on board for sharing them inside your essays. At a high distinction standard, it's all those same skills but performed to a higher standard. When you identify the 21st century skills, they're insightfully identified. When you make a persuasive argument, it's sound, logical, and well supported. When you demonstrate the classroom practices, you've created illustrations of practice. I guess the difference between an example and an illustration might be that it is a clearer and easier to understand example. And at a high distinction stand, it's relevant and innovative. So we talked about that earlier in this video. Innovative is important if you're if you're aiming for a high distinction. To make a really obvious example, a photocopy of blackline mastered spreadsheets, worksheets, would probably not be an innovative practice. You'd have to make a very strong argument for why worksheets are an innovative practice, but I'm sure that you'll be able to come up with other more innovative ways to teach English. You'll obviously be drawing from research at a high distinction standard, and you'll be ensuring that it's scholarly, that it's contemporary, meaning that it's recent, and that it's evidence-based. And the effective use of language is a feature of your paper. Making use of your tutor and smart thinking are one way to further develop your effective language use. So do draw on those resources. It could mean the difference between one grade level and the next. Speaking of support available, that's exactly what it is. Smart thinking and your tutor are one of the places you can go to for support. Your LAs are all very experienced in English teaching, and they'll be able to support you. You can access that support through the discussion boards. Please post as many questions as you need to in those discussion boards, and aim to post them in the boards rather than emailing your ELA, just so that they can give one answer to your whole group rather than answering individually in emails. Do email your ELA if you need an extension of less than 2 days. They'll be able to sort you out for a 48-hour extension should you think you need it, and give them a reason why you think you need that extension. And if something more serious is happening in your life and you need more than 48 hours, head through to the student toolbox and submit an extension request in there. Try not to leave those extensions until the last minute. Plan ahead and see what's going to come up. Now, these things are tips for formatting your assessment. These won't have an impact on your grade. It just makes it easier for us to read them. And a happy ELA makes for happy grades. No, we of course will base it on on the rubric, but it is really helpful if you can give us double spacing throughout your essay. That'll give us somewhere to mark some comments and give you some ideas as feedback for your next essays. It's helpful if you aim for around size 12 font or size 11 font, somewhere around there. It's helpful if you leave some margins around the outside where we can drop some comments. And it's easier to read your paragraphs if you can indent them. As I said, these are just suggestions that make everything a little bit more simple. They won't impact on your overall grade. Please submit your assessment via the Turnitin link. It's a good idea to keep that receipt so that if anything should happen, you can prove that you submitted it on time. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you in a live Collaborate session where you can ask more questions about all of this information. Thanks.